Snow was falling in thick flakes as Steve and Joanna stepped out of the county pickup truck. The driver dropped them off in front of Coldwater's 24-hour diner, the only light on in town at 4 in the morning. Joanna pulled her scarf tight over her face, feeling the wind cut her skin like dry blades. No sound except the wind. No movement except the white dust being blown across the ground. Daniel Martinez was waiting for them inside, sitting in a booth at the back. The door shut behind them with a dull thud, the smell of burnt coffee mixed with old grease. Nothing welcoming. Joanna walked over to him. Daniel looked exhausted, pale, eyes red like he hadn't slept in days. His hands were shaking even though they were resting on the table. Steve sat down first. Joanna stood still for a second, watching Daniel. Something in him was broken. It wasn't regular fear. It was the kind of terror that traps you inside yourself. "You got here fast," he muttered, not lifting his eyes from the table. "Tell us what happened," Joanna said, slowly sitting down. Daniel took a deep breath, but it came out shaky. He spoke fast, with no unnecessary pauses, like he was trying to rip it out of his own body. "The station started. You need to understand it's not just isolation, it's not the weather. It's not psychological. There are rules there. Rules that don't make sense, but if you break them, you die." Joanna held her gaze steady. Silent encouragement. "The first night," he said, "I heard footsteps. Heavy ones, steady, going around the whole building. For 3 hours straight. The walls were shaking. Ceramic on the shelf fell to the floor. Nothing human walks like that." He clenched his hands until his knuckles turned white. "We weren't allowed to look out the windows between 11:11 and 3:33. No one says why. They just say if you look, you disappear." "Did you see anyone look?" Joanna asked. Daniel took a few seconds to answer. "Thomas." Joanna's throat tightened. He kept going before she could ask. It was the second week. He always had those blackouts. He'd just stand there staring at the curtain, like something was calling him. "I woke up to a metallic noise. Walked out of the room and saw the hallway curtain wide open, all the way like someone had ripped it open." His fingers were shaking even more. Thomas was looking outside. Joanna held her pencil against the closed notebook. She was listening to every detail but felt a tightness in the back of her neck. Steve took a deep breath beside her, keeping his reaction in check. "What did you see?" she asked. Daniel swallowed hard. "At first, nothing. Snow. Darkness. Then something touched the glass. From outside. It wasn't a hand. It wasn't a claw. I don't know how to describe it. It was quick. The glass bulged, then cracked. Thomas didn't move. He didn't react. Just stood there like he was waiting." Joanna made a mental note. Induced behavior, compulsion, hypnosis. Daniel lowered his head, like remembering it was worse than saying it out loud. The glass blew inward. A perfect round hole. Clean. Like it was cut with an industrial tool. And something pulled Thomas. It wasn't an attack. There was no struggle. He was just taken. Disappeared into the dark with a dragging sound. There wasn't even time to scream. Joanna clenched her hand tight. "Did they find the body?" Steve asked, voice low. Daniel shook his head. "No. But we found the trail. A ring of scratches on the outer metal wall, signs that something massive leaned on it. Then the footprints, over a meter long. Deep. The distance between them, I can't explain, it was like 2 steps per lap." Joanna looked at Steve. Neither of them had a category in the Myers family notes that fit any of this. Daniel kept going. "After that, I started paying attention to the rules. Sarah, the senior researcher, followed every single one to the letter. I didn't believe in any of it, not until that night." He took a deep breath, trying to pull himself together. The knocks always came in the same pattern. Started at the front door, then moved to the sides, then to the back. A full circuit, like they were testing the strength of the structure. Always the same. If someone responded, they got louder. Joanna asked, "Did anyone respond?" Daniel stared into nothing for a long few seconds. David, the supervisor, he was starting to lose it, talking to things no one else could see, kept saying they needed to get in. One night, during the knocks, he got up and went to the front. I tried to stop him. He unlatched the door. That's all. Opened and shut it. 1 click, 1 second. But it was enough. A minute later, the knocking changed locations. Joanna felt a chill run through her body. Changed how? She asked. They focused on Thomas's room door, Daniel murmured. Like they knew he was the one who looked. Like they remembered. They were looking for him, even after death. They didn't seem interested in us. They wanted him. Joanna took note of it. Selection pattern. Specific target. Memory. After that, I hid my stuff. Started planning the escape. They didn't sleep anymore. Sarah talked to the walls. David was making lists of supplies that didn't exist. I didn't want to be next. I waited for the clearest night, started the snowmobile, and took off. He finally looked up. But I wasn't alone. Joanna didn't move. What do you mean? Daniel clenched his fists tightly. That thing followed me for almost 20 kilometers. Never showed up in the headlights. Never made a sound over the wind. But it was there. I saw the snow moving. I saw the shadow keeping up with the snowmobile. Getting way too close. I don't know why it didn't take me. I think it gave up when it saw the city lights. Joanna processed everything in silence. Nothing there matched shapeshifters. Nothing resembled Wendigos, Draugr, ice entities, or any creature cataloged in her files. Nothing behaved like that. Intelligence, method, persistence, specific time-based rules, focus on windows and doors, compulsion in isolated humans, underground movement, footprints that didn't match any known anatomy. You can't go back there, Daniel whispered. If you go, you'll die. That station's marked. That thing knows who enters, who looks, who tries to leave. Don't give it a chance. Joanna breathed slowly, feeling the weight of the decision forming. She looked at Steve. He already knew what she was thinking. We're going to the station, she said. Daniel flinched like he'd been punched. No. I saw what happens there. It's not just an abandoned place. It's not just noise or wind. That thing is waiting. Doesn't matter what you think you can do. Steve answered before she could. We don't have a choice. Joanna stood up. The decision was made. Daniel lowered his head, defeated. Outside, the wind picked up. The diner's lights flickered. The glass trembled slightly, like something was getting closer to the town, watching from a distance. Joanna walked to the door. It wasn't the cold outside that made her pause. It was something else. A simple, direct feeling, with no poetry. They weren't dealing with an animal. That thing studied people. It waited for mistakes, and the station was the perfect place for that. She pulled up her jacket zipper. Let's go. The case had begun. So had the real fear. The road leading out of Coldwater was a gray streak cutting through the snow. The sky had no clear color. It looked like a dull blade hanging over Joanna's head. She kept her eyes steady on the horizon while Steve drove the pickup truck borrowed from City Hall. The engine vibrated like it didn't like the path they were on. No other tracks crossed the road. It was a long, empty corridor leading to the station. When they passed the spot where Daniel's snowmobile should have first appeared, Joanna asked Steve to slow down. Something on the right shoulder caught her attention. A long, deep groove where the weight of the snowmobile had crushed the snow down to the hard ice layer. The snowmobile wasn't there, but the marks were clear. They followed the trail for about 20 meters until they found the snowmobile lying on its side. The headlight was broken, the dashboard frozen. The seat covered in that same thin layer of ice that forms when someone leaves something behind in a rush and the cold does the rest. Joanna crouched down, ran her hand along the side of the fairing. She found something irregular, an impact mark. The metal was dented inward like something big had slammed into the snowmobile while it was moving. It wasn't a regular scratch. It was too deep. This matches what Daniel said, Steve said, scanning the area. The force here isn't from a regular animal. Joanna didn't answer. She studied the ground around them. The snow was full of uneven depressions, not clear footprints, craters of weight, repeated, irregular. Each indentation was over 80 centimeters wide. The depth ranged from 20 to 40 centimeters, even with hard ice underneath. No known land animal had that kind of mass. Not bears, not moose, nothing documented in Alaska. She marked 2 of the depressions and measured the distance between them. It was too short for the stride of something that heavy, and there were no drag marks. No continuous trail, just isolated spots of absolute weight pressed into the ground, as if the thing appeared and disappeared between each contact with the earth. "This is discontinuous movement," Joanna said. "It's not normal locomotion." Steve looked up. The wind was cutting hard. He studied the marks like he was trying to force them to make sense. "Could be unstable ground," he said. "Weaker ice layer underneath. Irregular collapse." Joanna answered immediately. "No, this depth is consistent. The force is constant, and there's no lateral shift. Each of these marks is fixed weight being applied straight down. This isn't a step. It's contact. Something stopping on the exact spot before disappearing from view." Steve stayed quiet. He was processing what that meant. Joanna stood up, and they kept following the path Daniel had taken during his escape. Almost 3 kilometers ahead, they found another set of marks. This time, more organized. 3 craters in a line, as if the thing had moved around a fixed point. Joanna caught it quickly. These marks circled the shadow of a broken light pole. The lamp had fallen into the snow. The glass was shattered. The exposed wires had been violently ripped out. She touched the wires and pulled back. The metal had snapped from cold with no signs of heat or electrical discharge. Someone, or something, had torn the entire lamp off the pole. "Doesn't like light," Joanna said. "Daniel said it stopped when it saw the city lights," Steve added. Joanna measured the indentations around the pole. All of them stopped exactly 4 meters from the base. None went past that line. It was like there was an invisible boundary drawn by the light. That realization brought a bittersweet feeling. A weakness, but also a rule. And rules could be used. "It doesn't cross direct light," Joanna said. "Strong light or any light?" Steve asked. Joanna examined the surface of the shattered lamp. "Seems like it avoids artificial light." "I don't know about natural light. Daniel said it only stopped near the city. Could be any environment where humans are awake. Maybe it's not the light itself. Maybe it's the full set of signals cities emit. But for now, we stick with light." Steve looked around. The wind was picking up. Visibility was getting worse. It was time to head back to the truck. On the way, they passed a group of locals riding snowmobiles. 4 men, all dressed in heavy winter gear. The group's leader slowed down when he saw them examining the destroyed pole. "You from the station?" he asked. Joanna said no. She explained they were investigating what happened to the researcher who escaped. The man relaxed a little. "So everything's normal then," he said with an unsettling calm. "Whenever someone stays up there too long, they come back thinking they saw things. Winter messes with your head." Joanna studied his face. He wasn't joking. He truly believed what he was saying. One of the other men laughed. "Must have been the White Watcher. He shows up when we go too long without sunlight." The laugh faded quickly when he saw Joanna didn't react. "It's just a town joke," he added awkwardly. Joanna wrote down the name. White Watcher. Even as a joke, legends carry echoes of something real. They're not always useful clues, but always worth keeping. The group left, but not before the leader added, "Stay away from the far north. The ice is opening and closing with no pattern." Joanna grew thoughtful. Ice that opens and closes with no pattern isn't just a weather event. Many underground creatures alter the terrain as they move, but nothing known would create perfect holes like the ones Daniel described. They drove a few more kilometers and stopped when the GPS showed they were near the spot where Daniel said the attack happened. There, the snow was disturbed in wide circles, like something had gone around the snowmobile several times. But the pattern wasn't continuous. It was made up of isolated strikes on the ground, as if something moved in a way that couldn't be tracked by normal physical rules. Joanna crouched and ran her hand over the broken ice. "It circled him," she said. Steve examined the ground. "Why didn't it kill him?" he asked. Joanna felt a discomfort crawl up her spine. Maybe it didn't want him. Maybe it was studying, testing human escapability. Maybe it's not predatory in the usual sense. Maybe it only attacks when someone breaks the right rule. Steve understood the subtext. The creature wasn't just aggressive. It was methodical. It didn't attack out of hunger. It attacked with a reason. They headed back to the vehicle. The road disappeared behind them, swallowed by snow. As they neared the station, they saw a gray structure in the distance, rising out of the pure white. It was larger than Joanna had imagined, shaped like a reinforced box. No visible windows, no tall antennas. Each wall looked like it had been built to withstand constant storms. There was no movement, no sound, no sign of life. But there were tracks, and they were clearer than the previous ones. Circles, parallel lines, deep depressions forming paths. The entire station was marked by a pattern that resembled a siege route. No matter which side they approached from, there were always signs that something had been circling the structure with calm and precision. Joanna studied the tracks for several minutes. Then she noted, it follows fixed routes, all at the same distance from the walls. A continuous siege, like it's checking for weak spots. Steve scanned the perimeter. That's a military pattern, he said. Joanna nodded. This wasn't animal behavior. It was surveillance behavior. It doesn't try to get in during the day, Joanna said. But it doesn't leave either. It stays here, waiting, maybe listening. Steve pointed toward the base of the building. There's something deeper than this. Joanna saw it. The ice was broken in regular spots. Old holes closed now, but still visible. They weren't natural. They had a defined circular shape like vertical tunnels sealed by ice pressure. Everything pointed to a creature that moved from bottom to top, not top to bottom. She stepped closer and touched the edge of one of the frozen holes. The ice was colder than the surrounding surface, a cold that seemed to come from within, like there was a hollow space under the layer. Steve took a deep breath. This doesn't live on the surface. Joanna answered, no, it comes up. The two of them stood there in silence, listening to the wind hitting the station's metal walls. There was no doubt. The thing circling the station had intelligence. It had a method. It had patience. And it was tracking every human move that got close. The investigation that once seemed unlikely was now taking shape. The first rupture in reality had happened. The creature wasn't a legend. It wasn't a delusion. It wasn't a metaphor for isolation. It was a real active presence, constant and bigger than any initial theory. Joanna put away her notebook, adjusted her coat, and stared at the station door. They hadn't even gone inside yet, and there were already too many clues. The station door creaked as Steve pushed open the frozen latch. Inside came the stale smell of metal, spoiled food, and isolation. Joanna stepped in first, flashlight in hand. The beam lit up narrow hallways, walls marked with scratches, and dust that didn't look like regular neglect. It was the kind of dirt left by people who left too fast, or didn't get the chance to leave at all. She kept her breathing steady. The structure had no open windows. All the curtains were pinned down with clips and industrial tape. The silence was so thick that any movement from the pair felt out of place. Daniel's room was in the first hallway. The bedsheets were thrown on the floor. The chair was tipped over. An open book on the desk had torn pages, but there were no signs of a struggle. It looked like the room of someone who ran without looking back. The room next door belonged to Thomas. Joanna pushed the door open and felt the air grow heavier. Objects were arranged in a strange way, shoes lined up as if someone had repositioned them dozens of times, papers stacked in a spiral shape, the blanket folded with obsessive perfection. The details matched what Daniel had reported: compulsive behavior, trance, loss of sense of reality. Joanna took pictures of everything. On the floor, she saw circular marks on the rug, like something had been dragged repeatedly. She touched them with her fingers. They weren't from furniture. They were marks from human weight being pulled out of the bed. Out in the hallway, Steve was watching the closed doors. "I don't feel anything alive in here," he said. Joanna agreed. The building was a dead block. They headed to the kitchen. The central table had 4 wooden shelves stacked in an uneven way, like an improvised barricade. The sink was full of plates with dry food stuck to the bottom. The sour smell pointed to days without cleaning. But what caught Joanna's attention was in the trash. 3 cans of cat food, new label. No records mentioned any animals at the station. She opened the supply cabinet. The shelves had empty gaps that didn't match the list sent by the university. Almost an entire shelf was missing, but the floor had trails of crumbs, too organized to be from any natural infestation. The tracks led to a maintenance cabinet sealed with double adhesive tape. Just like Daniel had described, Joanna leaned in close to the crack. Something had scratched the wood from the inside. Small marks. Parallel. Precise. Steve stepped in close. "Not an animal," he said. "This is intentional." Joanna stepped back and made a mental note. Internal manipulation of enclosed space. Ability to break seals. Basic intelligence. They moved on to the technical wing. The generator room was partially dismantled, not from mechanical failure, but from interference. Loose screws on the floor, an open panel. Wires pulled out with no clean cut. It didn't look like damage from rage. It looked like testing. Like someone trying to understand how it worked without knowing exactly what electricity was. Joanna examined the floor. She found a perfect circular scratch, 20 centimeters in diameter. Deep. As if something had drilled into the metal flooring and given up halfway through. "Incomplete hole," she said. Steve used the flashlight to light the area. "This is just like what Daniel described. Perfect holes. This starts here." Joanna felt the first real chill crawl up her spine. The creature wasn't just circling the station. It was trying to get in, and trying from different angles. She wrote it down. Attempted internal breach. Probing behavior. They found the dining hall. The chairs were stacked in a corner. The table had deep scratches. Joanna ran her hand over the scraped metal. The marks formed parallel lines. Big. Long. Like claws. But they weren't ordinary claws. The grooves weren't uniform in width. The depth varied, as if multiple tips were acting at the same time. She swallowed hard. "I don't know what kind of limb makes that," Steve replied. "I'm not sure it's a limb." The sentence lingered. It was possible the creature didn't have conventional anatomy. Maybe something flexible. Maybe something that could change. Knowledge wasn't helping. Uncertainty made it worse. They kept sweeping the area. The monitoring room was intact, but the servers were turning on and off with no pattern. Joanna accessed the panel. She found video files labeled Night 6, Night 12, and Night 18. She watched them right there. The first video showed Thomas staring at a closed curtain for 9 full minutes, without blinking, without moving his body. Then suddenly, he reached out toward the curtain and stopped just centimeters from touching it. The video ended when Sarah pulled him back. The second video showed David talking to someone behind the door. The camera only captured the image of the closed door. He was answering questions that couldn't be heard. His body would go rigid, and at times he'd turn his head like he was hearing multiple voices at once. The third video made Joanna stop. It showed one of the hallways at 2:14 a.m. The camera had interference, but still managed to catch something moving too fast. There was no defined shape, just movement. The stretched shadow disappeared whenever the emergency light flickered. It made no sound, didn't touch the walls, but the image blurred in a way that shouldn't be possible for something material. Joanna felt her hand sweat inside the glove. She replayed the clip 3 times. Same result. The shadow only existed in the frames where the light was weaker. "It comes in when the light drops," she said. Steve looked closer. "It doesn't move like a quadruped or a biped, more like a slide. But the weight in the tracks outside is massive." "That's contradictory," Joanna agreed. It was far too contradictory. That meant something was wrong with the clues. Or maybe they were interpreting it all too much like humans would. Steve offered a theory. Could be a human predator who went insane and lives in the vents. Joanna dismissed it instantly. The holes in the ice aren't human. The weight on the ground isn't human. And the behavior blackouts aren't from conventional induction. This is something else. They discussed a few more theories. Nothing fit. Nothing made sense. The feeling of helplessness started to squeeze the air in the hallway. That's when a muffled sound ran across the metal ceiling. A heavy shifting noise. A dry impact, followed by a faint vibration. The structure answered with a creak. Joanna raised the flashlight toward the ceiling. She saw nothing, but the sound was there. Something was walking on the roof. A slow step, then another. The distance between them suggested abnormal size. Steve moved closer to the wall, trying to feel the vibration. That's heavy. Way too heavy to be up there without breaking through. The sound continued, step after step, heading toward the rear of the station. Joanna couldn't tell if it was actual movement or vibration from something underground. The station felt like it was breathing. They headed for the back door. It was intact on the outside, but had fresh scratches on the lower part. Marks that ran the entire width of the metal. Long, cold to the touch. Joanna lowered her face to the surface. There was the scent of deep ice. A smell that wasn't natural. It was dry, almost metallic. Steve stepped back 2 paces. I feel like this is way too close. Joanna took note of the feeling. It wasn't paranoia. It was the perception of presence. Something beneath them, something aware. She closed the notebook. Let's finish the sweep. Then we'll analyze everything at once. Neither of them said out loud what both were silently concluding. Something had studied every inch of that station. Something that mimicked human behavior but wasn't human. Something that tested sounds, lights, structures, minds. The station wasn't abandoned, it was occupied, but not by people. The control room was at the center of the abandoned station. The air in there had a different smell, like old paper mixed with a fridge that had been unplugged. Steve opened the door carefully, gun pointed at the floor. Joanna shone her flashlight over the main desk. There were stacked papers, piles of recordings, notes taped to the walls. Everything looked like it had been left in a hurry, as if people had abandoned the place in a matter of seconds. Joanna picked up a large notebook, its cover bent and marked by haste. Sarah's name was written in blue pen in the corner. She opened it to the most recent page. The handwriting was steady at first, then grew unstable. It mentioned noises on the roof, changes in Thomas's behavior, disappearing inventory, that hole in the ice that kept growing for no reason. Every entry had a timestamp. She had been methodical to the end. On the last page, one sentence was written with excessive pressure. Something is listening. Steve was going through another desk. There was a broken laptop, like it had been hit by something heavy. Next to it, a digital recorder missing its battery cover. He picked it up and saw that someone had written dates on the body of the device. Joanna found the box where the batteries were stored. They were scattered, a few still charged. She inserted 2 into the recorder and turned it on. The initial static filled the room, then a voice. It was Thomas. Hearing his voice made Joanna's stomach tighten. He spoke in a whisper like he was afraid something might hear him. At first he described noises. Then he talked about the feeling that the entire station had gotten smaller overnight. He sounded tired and confused. At one point in the recording, he stopped speaking. The silence lasted almost a full minute until another voice came in the background. It wasn't human. It was low, uneven, with tones that faded in and out of the mic's range. It didn't sound like language. It was more like a series of sound cycles, compressed vibrations struggling to form words. Joanna hit pause. The silence in the room grew heavier after hearing that. Steve rewound the tape to just before the strange part. Thomas's voice said something right before he stopped. When they listened again, they caught a short phrase they had missed the first time. "It's trying to learn my rhythm." Joanna wrote the sentence in the notebook she carried. With every new piece of the investigation, the creature stopped sounding like an animal. Nothing in that recording fit the idea of a typical predator. It wasn't ecological. It wasn't behavioral. The background sound had intention, not emotion, not rage, just intention. Steve turned on another flashlight and lit up the whiteboard fixed to the back wall. A map of the station was drawn in red ink. Circular lines marked the outer perimeter. Next to them, times were written with precision. 11:11, 11:30, 12:05, 1:20, sieges, patrol patterns. Arrows showed movement around the structure. Thomas had marked every vibration he'd heard moving through the ground. Joanna stepped closer and measured the distance between the lines. It was uniform. That thing didn't move like an animal following scent. It moved around the building with geometric accuracy, like it was mapping the structure or studying its weak points. Steve looked at the board seriously. This isn't hunting. Its study. Joanna agreed. The creature observed the station as if it were an object to be figured out. It didn't seem interested in escaping, taking over, or simply destroying. It wanted to understand. They found another recording, this time on a flash drive plugged into a small portable monitor. Steve powered it on. The screen showed the station's main hallway, recorded by a security camera. Thomas was walking alone at 3 in the morning. He stopped in front of a covered window, stood still for 2 minutes. The video had audio. A low scratching came from outside. Rhythmic, precise, like a slow drum. Thomas placed his hand on the curtain. Something on the other side responded with another sequence of scratches, now with equal pauses, as if it were mimicking the rhythm of his breathing. "It's learning," Joanna said, almost without realizing. In the video, Thomas pulled the curtain aside. The footage froze for a second due to interference. When it came back, the window was open. The glass had been removed from the inside out. No break. No shards. A black line filled the space where the night began. Thomas fell backward, legs twisting as he tried to retreat. Something pulled his head toward the opening. A fast force, way too strong. He vanished within seconds. The camera shook when the window frame vibrated. Then, nothing. The feed kept recording the empty hallway. Joanna turned off the monitor. Thomas's death wasn't an abstract idea at that point. It was a record. Clean, direct, no effects. It had happened exactly as Daniel described, and somehow it was worse on video. Steve studied the window frame in the footage. It didn't break. The creature didn't destroy anything. It just opened it. They left the control room with their ears tuned to every sound. They now knew the creature didn't strike at random. It needed a pattern, an opening, a break in routine. Thomas's mistake had been looking outside, had been offering the rhythm of his own breathing as a clue. Nothing about this was supernatural in the classic sense. The creature didn't phase through walls. It didn't vanish. It studied, built strategy, moved in when it was certain. In the technical area, they found more evidence. The floor had long marks, like wide claws dragged with precise spacing. Joanna took measurements while Steve checked the electrical panel. The marks were evenly spaced. It was as if each claw had been positioned with mathematical intent. "It's not random movement," Joanna wrote in her notebook. "It's calculated repetition." They found something else in the generator sector. A metal plate had been removed from the floor with geometric precision. The hole wasn't irregular. It had an exact diameter, as if someone had cut it out with engineering tools. Steve shone his light into the hole. There was no bottom, just a black space that swallowed the beam. He tested it by dropping a screw. No sound came back. The same kind of opening Daniel had described outside. The same kind of hole the creature seemed to use as a passage. Joanna examined the edge with a magnifying lens. The melted ice had solidified in a radial pattern, showing signs of sudden heat. Not human, not environmental. Some form of energy that wasn't fire and wasn't friction. She stepped back. It dug this, alone, from the bottom up. While they recorded the data, their radios started crackling with repeated interference, short bursts of frequency coming in and out of the channel, as if something were trying to mimic communication static. Steve turned the radios off immediately. He didn't want the creature to have any auditory record of their rhythm. The final discovery came from a metal box in the chemical lab. It was Sarah's complete journal, organized with military precision. She had documented every night, every step, every pattern. At a certain point, she described the growing sense that the creature was syncing its own movements with the internal movement of the station. In one specific entry, she wrote, "It started as curiosity. Now it's method. It's learning. We've become the model." Steve shut the journal hard. The creature isn't just ancient, it's intelligent. And it mimics. Joanna looked at the hallway door, where the silence was absolute. It's trying to understand what it means to be human. They looked at each other. The investigation had shifted. It was no longer about figuring out what kind of thing was circling the station. Now it was about understanding what it wanted. The pattern was clear. The creature studied rhythm, movement, Routine. Human repetition served as both guide and bait. Sarah's final entry read, "It has learned enough. It's going to try to come in." Steve packed the recordings. Joanna zipped the journal into her backpack. The room felt smaller now. The whole station felt smaller. Nothing there had been built to resist the kind of intelligence that was watching them. They knew they didn't have much time before the creature's next surveillance cycle began. They chose to continue, now fully aware that every step, every breath, and every vibration in the floor might be analyzed by something that was only waiting for a single human mistake to act. The partial power loss started with a short pop in the wires. The lights flickered twice, failed for nearly half a second, then came back weak with a yellowish tone that made the station feel smaller and more suffocating. Steve looked up immediately. Joanna turned the improvised EM sensor she carried and watched the needle swing with no pattern. The radio crackled with static, then silence. The structure vibrated with a dry impact coming from the roof. It wasn't a bang. It was movement, something large and heavy walking on the metal. One step, then another. Long pause between each. Measured weight. Routine. They both froze. The electrical panel lit up with a red overload warning. Steve shut down the auxiliary line manually to keep the rest of the circuits from burning out. The vibration continued. The creature was pacing the roof just like in the recordings. Same distance. Same rhythm. Joanna whispered. It started before 11:11. Steve checked the clock. It was 10:53. The creature was changing the pattern. The floor shook when something heavy slid down the side of the station. The sound ran along the metal siding like the structure had been scraped by an excavator. It wasn't a natural scratch. It was deliberate, parallel. Just like the marks found in the generator sector. The lights failed again. Steve switched on the hand flashlight. Joanna did the same. They signaled to each other and ran to the central sector, where they could see more doors and avoid dead ends. The steps on the roof sped up. Fixed rhythm. Always the same. As if it were tracking their movement inside the station. The creature was responding to human motion. Instant response, like it had studied every vibration recorded over the past days. In the main hallway, the fuse panel exploded. Bits of plastic flew through the air. The lights went out completely. 2 flashlights were all that stood between them, and total darkness. A second impact on the roof was strong enough to shake dust from the light fixtures. Steve pressed his ear to the wall. He heard something that sounded like deep breathing. It wasn't animal. It wasn't human. It was air moving in and out of a space far too large to fit in the ceiling. The thing was testing parts of the structure, measuring strength. There was no mockery, no emotional intent, only method. Joanna took salt from a jar and threw it on the 2 nearby doors. It wasn't superstition. It was a safety pattern they had learned from old hunters, meant for creatures that relied on vibration. Salt reduced acoustic reflection and confused structural reading. The vibration lessened. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then a single knock came from the east wall. It was sharp, precise. Same rhythm as the scratches from the video. A second knock, then a third. The sequence was identical to Thomas's breathing pattern in the recording. The creature was using the sounds it had learned. It was mathematical communication, aggressive imitation. The structural reinforcement started to creak. Joanna raised her flashlight to the ceiling. The metal along the upper seam was denting inward by 2 centimeters, in a straight line. It wasn't a random attempt at breaking in. It was a calculated action on the most vulnerable point. Steve opened his backpack and pulled out the emergency portable light, an industrial lamp used in deep excavation. He switched it on. The lamp lit the hallway with intense white. The vibration on the roof stopped immediately. Joanna noted it mentally. Strong light was the only thing that made the creature back off. Daniel had said it never crossed illuminated areas. Now they had direct confirmation. The lamp began to flicker. The creature reacted to the device. The shadow moved along the ceiling like a thick outline, trying to stay away from the light while still testing the structure. The west wall started to push inward. Slowly and silently. From the inside out was impossible. It was coming from below. The floor in Sarah's lab had been cut with precision. The creature was tunneling with technique. It used holes as points of shifting movement. The wood in the interior paneling began to crack in a horizontal line. Joanna stepped back and shouted, "It's coming up." Steve aimed the lamp directly at the point of deformation. The moment the light touched the area, the pressure stopped. The wood ceased giving way. Then, a heavy hit struck the south door. It didn't break, it only tested. Another hit. The door vibrated with the same pattern Thomas had heard before he died. Joanna took a deep breath. "It wants us to make a mistake." Steve nodded. "It wants us to match its rhythm." He adjusted the lamp again. The circuits hissed, but the light held. They knew that when the lamp failed, it would be over. The creature moved to a third attack point. The floor shook beneath their feet. The vibration was fast, repetitive, almost like calibrating a heavy tool. The light flickered. Once. Then again. Joanna gripped the lamp with both hands. "Don't let it go out." The ceiling metal bent. A whole panel started to fold downward. The central screw popped loose and hit the floor with a sharp sound. Something was pushing behind the metal sheet, testing its resistance to the limit. The lamp flickered harder. Steve hit the panel to stabilize it. "Come on, hold." The light returned, but dimmer. The creature pulled back a few inches, but didn't give up the attack. The clock read 3:13 a.m. They knew that if they could hold out until 3:33, the creature's cycle would end. That was the pattern seen in the recordings. The pattern the creature itself kept repeating. Another hit on the ceiling. The metal sheet opened by 3 fingers. The hand that would come through wouldn't be human. Joanna raised the lamp straight at the opening. The creature retreated sharply, dragging metal claws across the outer panel. The sound ran across the roof and vanished on the far side of the station. 1 minute, then another. The clock moved forward slowly. The silence felt forced, as if the creature were choosing another point of attack. 3:30. The lamp flickered. The creature moved toward the north corridor. Heavy steps on the metal siding. Faster rhythm. One last attempt. 3:32. The northeast wall began to give way. The metal pushed inward as if being struck by an invisible battering ram. Joanna raised the lamp. The creature didn't back down. Not this time. 3:33. The impact stopped. All movement stopped. The pressure on the roof vanished. The hallway returned to its original silence. It wasn't gradual. It was sudden. The creature had given up, or obeyed its own cycle. Joanna turned off the lamp with a trembling hand. Steve took his first breath in minutes. They both stayed still, waiting for the next vibration. It never came. The creature had gone back down into the ice. They had survived. The station was lost. Steve and Joanna gathered the recordings and left carefully through the most well-lit route. They didn't look back. There was no reason to examine the interior again. The structure had been compromised. Every wall bore geometric marks of predatory study. When they reached the outside, the aurora was just starting to rise on the horizon, faint and distant. Natural light touched the edge of the roof. The creature retreated into the depths of the ice, too fast to be seen. The station would remain empty, and it would never be used again. They returned to the city in silence, knowing this wasn't the end. It was only the first fracture in the world before the greater storm. The next answer would come from someone who understood more than anyone else. The person waiting for them at the research center, Cindy Lou Who, and she would have explanations that changed everything. The research center was in Anchorage, a low concrete building with no signs, no exposed windows. A federal agent met them at the door, asked for documents, verified signatures, and led them through narrow hallways where sound seemed to die before touching the walls. The place smelled like clean metal, old paper, and cold coffee. No one spoke. It felt like a hospital, but with no patients. A lab, but with no windows. A prison, but with no cells. They were taken to a meeting room in the basement. Heavy wooden table, harsh white lighting, air conditioning so strong it burned the skin. The agent asked them to wait. Joanna took off her gloves and rubbed her frozen hands, trying to bring some warmth back to her fingers. Steve stayed standing, pacing in short circles. His heavy jacket still carried the smell of snow and isopropyl alcohol used to clean the abandoned station. The door opened. The person who entered didn't seem to care about formalities. Almost 50, thick coat, face marked by sleepless nights, and a gaze trained to recognize danger before it had a name. She walked up to the table, opened a leather folder, and said, "I'm the director of this center. I want your full report. No filters. No comforting guesses. I need the truth." Her tone didn't ask. It demanded. Steve sat for the first time since they'd arrived. Joanna mentally organized what needed to be said. They both began recounting what they had found. The anomalies in the inventory, the perfect holes in the ice, the vibrating roof, the giant footprints, the chase against something that never showed up in the beam of light. The director took notes without interrupting. When they finished, she stayed silent for several long seconds, weighing every piece of information like parts of a machine about to fail. "This doesn't belong to our catalog," she said finally. "It's not a spirit, it's not a natural predator, it's not a shapeshifter, it's not a demon. It's something older than any term we have to classify the unknown." Joanna leaned forward. "Has something like this ever shown up before?" "Not that type. But signs like these have shown up in long cycles, always before a major event, always before ruptures." The director opened another folder. Inside were yellowed pages, arcane symbols, and notes written by different hands over decades. "There's a prophecy," she said. "Old, fragmented, connected to what some call the Father of Winter." Steve took a deep breath. "I don't believe in prophecies. You don't have to believe. You just have to listen." She turned the first page. The paper was so old it nearly crumbled at the edges. "There are 3 weapons. 3 ancient instruments built for a single purpose. The Sword of the Magi, the Staff of St. Nicholas, and the Twilight Bell. Alone, they don't do what they're meant to do. Together, they form the divine armor, created to stop the return of the Father of Winter when the 3rd seal is broken." Joanna studied the symbols closely, trying to trace their origins. There was no single cultural pattern. It looked like a mosaic of different centuries stitched together by hands that had never met. "And what we saw at the station," she said, "is related to the Father of Winter." The director shook her head. "No, that's not one of his servants. It's something else. But the world is like thin ice. When it cracks in one place, it cracks in others. What you faced is the symptom, not the illness. Its appearance means the barriers are weakening." Steve frowned. "So that thing comes up from the ice because the world's getting more fragile?" "Yes, it's like underground pressure. Before a rupture, the ice shifts. Creatures that should stay buried rise, looking for heat, movement, life. And when they find it, they study, test, repeat patterns until they understand how to strike." She closed the folder. "Don't try to go back to that station. It's already been sealed. The military's going to cover the site with concrete and thermal sensors. Not because they can stop it, they can't. It's just to delay what's already begun." Joanna rested her elbows on the table. "And the 3 weapons. Where are they?" The director looked at the 2 of them like someone about to change a pair of hunters' lives forever. "Scattered. Lost in different centuries, recovered by the wrong hands, then vanished again. The 3 weapons only work together. If the 3rd seal breaks, you'll need them. There won't be another chance." She took a deep breath. "You're the first to witness such a strong sign of the weakening barriers. That's why you're being given top priority in the search for these weapons. When the time comes, you'll need to be ready." Steve wiped the cold sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his jacket. "How much time do we have?" "No one knows, but those watching know it's not much. What showed up at the station is the crack. What comes next is the storm." She stood up. They both stood up too, instinctively. "Get ready. Winter is changing. The world is changing, and you'll be at the center of it." The director left the room, leaving behind old maps, the notes of many dead researchers, and a sentence that seemed heavier than all the other information. Joanna packed the papers. Steve closed the folder. The 2 of them walked toward the exit of the research center, where the cold wind hit their faces like it had a will of its own. The city was silent. Snow was falling in slow, heavy flakes. The kind of snow not carried by wind. The kind that dropped straight down as if something beneath the surface was controlling its fall. Joanna looked down at the white, motionless ground. Feels like the ice is breathing. Steve tightened the strap on his backpack. And whatever's breathing didn't stay behind. The snow kept falling. No sound. No movement. Just the sense that something hungry and patient was moving beneath the white layer, waiting for the next fracture to open.